Hello and welcome to Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. I am your co-host JP John Paz from the two-man power trip of wrestling. And of course, joining me is the star of the show, the former ECW and WCW World Tag Team Champion, one of the greatest minds and bookers ever in the history of professional wrestling, the man behind the NWO, the man behind WCW's success. He's, of course, the Games Master, the Taskmaster, the devil himself, Mr. Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, how you doing today, sir?
Good, good. One of the things we always leave out is my time in San Francisco. A lot of people don't know about it. It was really my last run as a babyface. San Francisco is my favorite town in the United States. I had wonderful, wonderful memories of San Francisco. And I think why I'm bringing this in was with the loss of Pat Patterson this week. Pat and Ray Stevens built San Francisco, first as partners, then as opponents. That was a hard act to follow for anybody. And the sad thing is, I don't think there's a lot of tapes on Pat. You know, he was the first Intercontinental Champion, but Pat was one of the best workers of all times. And his matches with Ray Stevens, and they can say all they like about Steamboat and Flair, and they're right up there, and Brett and Shawn Michaels are right up there. But they don't surpass Stevens and Patterson, that's for sure. The upside down bump that Rick takes, he stole that from Ray Stevens. That goofy face plant, he stole that from Pat Patterson. They were some of the greatest performers in the history of our business. So, I'd like to send his condolences to his family because he was a real star and a brilliant guy.
As far as Pat Patterson, did you have a relationship with him? I know you obviously wrestled him a little bit in San Francisco, but any relationship after that, or were
I,
you guys friends at all?
I never wrestled Pat. I knew Pat. We bumped into each other later on in conventions. In fact, they ran the Cow Palace about 4 years ago, and they brought Pat and I in. Pat is I was a special enforcer, and Pat was a special guy in the corner or something. But and every time I got talked to Pat, he was very nice. I had never done any business with Pat, but he was a nice man.
Somebody had asked me, and this is a good question because I never really thought about it, or I never asked you about it. Really, I've thought about it before. But how come Pat had all the success in WWF? He was booking WWF for a while. How come you never worked for the WWE or WWF as far as the booking and the backstage stuff?
Uh, Probably because they were doing so well. I mean, I have that old theory: if it's not broken, don't fix it. And I mean, once Pat took over after, I think George Scott was the first, but after that, Pat really had Vince's ear. And hey, they were selling out at least 3 towns a night. Think about that. 3 towns a night and sometimes four. Think about that, John. Every night of the week. It's amazing to me. It's mind boggling. And then you flip over to the other side. During this time, I was working for Crockett and I was in the office with Dusty. And they were selling all 3 towns a night. So at least 6 or 7 days a week, 6 or 7 towns were selling out or coming damn near it. So I mean, I was there with Dusty for a long time, and then uh, when I almost went and I got a job in Japan, and I had just signed the contract. It was a couple of year contract, and then when I came back, Rick brought me into Atlanta, so I never really got a chance. I would have always liked to because I would have loved to have been around Pat. He's one of the few great minds I missed.
For sure. And of course, today on today's Test Match Talk episode, we want to focus on WCW, your time booking there, and one of the biggest shows in WCW history, if not the biggest show, as far as just money, buy rate, eyes on the program, eyes on the show. That is, of course, WCW Starrcade 1997. This is a monumental, huge show. Big time WCW versus NWO. You got Hollywood Hogan versus Sting. You always say the poster, the poster, the poster. How does that look on a poster? That looks unbelievable. And everyone bought in because this is a huge pay-per-view for WCW. Right? You love that look of that poster. Hogan, Hollywood Hogan, Crow
Right,
Sting.
right, right, and it had led up to it was payback for the baby faces to get over. You're almost sure that at the end of the night, Hogan was going to get counted out 1, 2, 3, and it would have been a huge explosion.
So this is going to be a culmination, or you think supposedly is going to be. We'll get into that a little bit later. The culmination of a big time feud, the culmination of Hollywood Hogan and Sting, which is one of the biggest feuds of all time. And at this point, it's the biggest feud ever in wrestling. If you just go by money and ratings and the buy rate of the pay per view and everything else. So let's go back to December 28th, 1997, from Washington D.C., the MCI Center. The attendance was 17,500. The buy rate, like I mentioned, was, I believe, the biggest ever until this point. Different sites have it listed at different places, but if you say it's basically 700,000 buys or more. So we'll just go there because I've seen some sites quoted at 650, but most sites I've seen quoted at 700, 750, or even 800. But let's just say it was about 700,000 buys. I believe WrestleNomics, who I probably trust the most, had it listed at 700,000. So I'll go with that. What do you think about that? Astronomical numbers.
Astro, think
Crazy.
about think about that. How many buys do you think the Roy Jones Tyson fight got? I have no idea, but it was nowhere close to that. I would assume, wouldn't you?
No, definitely not. Probably nowhere near that level. I mean, that's just crazy enough. 700,000. If you think about it too, because people were like, "Oh, WCW, who watched WCW?" 700,000 viewers, just a crazy number. And obviously, this is at the point of the 83 weeks where WCW was just killing them each and every week. 2 years of absolute dominance for you guys. So, did you expect a huge buy rate like that? Were you surprised by it?
No, I knew they would do a huge buy rate. I mean, we had built the heat up to a boiling point where it's going to explode. And the more I think of it, it could have been, it could have been in today's day and age, if all things were equal, that there was no streaming service and everything else, with a little bit maybe more mainstream publicity. You got to remember, we got hurt a lot because we were in Atlanta from mainstream publicity. When you're in New York, you get mainstream publicity. When you're in
Yep.
Atlanta, you don't get that mainstream publicity. So they could have reached a million buy rates if we hypothetically had been in New York or LA.
It's pretty great. WCW up at that point, it's going to be the highest buy rate for a wrestling pay per view of all time. Only lasting a couple months because WrestleMania 14 is right around the corner in 1998 with the aforementioned Mike Tyson involved. Obviously, Steve Austin versus Shawn Michaels is the main event, but Mike Tyson is the special guest referee, the enforcer. So he obviously helped the buy rate huge, and the build up to that with Tyson and Austin was just unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you think about this, though, DC, Washington DC, not known as a WCW hotbed, but it's been kind of a Starrcade thing. Is that Zane Bresloff or Bischoff? Who's kind of picking the MCI Center in DC?
That was Zane. Zane knew the towns to go to, and Zane was a guy that probably didn't get the credit he deserved. Zane knew the towns because he had worked for Vince for so long, and I thought, I mean, that was in. I had thought, originally I thought Baltimore would have been the town. That was a great town for WCW, but he pulled the rabbit out of the hat on this one. Going to Washington, and like you said, it was completely sold out. There wasn't an empty seat in that building.
And if you think about the build up to this pay per view, it's going to be Sting as the Crow Sting, who is in silence, hasn't wrestled for a year. He's basically kind of gone into hiding. He didn't know where he was, and he shows up on the rafters. He comes down with the bat, hands that bat out to certain people, turns his back. I mean, there's just whole build up with him and this mysterious thing building up throughout the year. Like, is he a heel? Is he a face? Finally, at Uncensored that year, he comes down from the crowd to one of the biggest pops I've ever heard in my life. And I've been watching wrestling for over 35 years. And if you go back and watch all those tapes, watch that. That pop is just insane when he comes out and he finally attacks the NWO, beats up Hall, Nash, Savage, and then Hogan. Rodman's on the outside looking in horror. So yeah, he finally says he's a baby face. He's with WCW. What did you think about kind of building up Sting as that mysterious figure, and why was he kind of the perfect guy to do it?
He was WCW through and through. He had never been to New York like Lex had been. He had started. Most people don't realize it. He started with Watts, and I think he went to Memphis for a while. But basically, his breakout for sure was in Atlanta when he wrestled Rick in the first Clash of Champions for an hour or 45 minutes it was. I mean, Rick made him. And I think that it goes back to this too. Isn't it funny that Sting drew any time you booked Sting against Flair or Sting against Hogan, two of the probably the biggest stars in the history of the wrestling business? They both drew with him because they both knew how to work with him. They just knew how to work with him. Unbeknownst to a lot of guys, there are some baby faces you have to make them look like Superman from the get-go and then stop them, but really not stop them until it's time almost to go home. And both of them had. Rick figured it out with when he wrestled Sting as a kid on the first 45-minute Broadway, and I think Hogan just followed Rick's lead and maybe added a little bit to it too. The dimensions, meaning the size of Hulk Hogan, and both of them made it work really well. It didn't look like it was choreographed. It looked very close as you could to a real fight. and they did a magnificent job of it.
So when you think about just like Sting, like he's not talking for a year. So he's so charismatic and he's always been one of the most charismatic wrestlers of all time. But this is an interesting thing though. He's so charismatic, people are so attached to him and his character. He's almost like Batman standing up on top of the buildings and looking down and surveying, seeing what's going on, then it strikes and attacks when he needs to. Obviously from the rafters with him and with that baseball bat, but he's not speaking, he's not talking. But somehow is getting more popular by not speaking and not talking. Is that something that's just foreign and never been done in wrestling before? Because I can't think of a guy where it's just like the less he says and kind of the less he does, the crowd is just loving him and clamoring for him that much more.
The only one that could compare him to was when Goldberg first started. He never talked.
Yeah. And it's funny because you'd think like they're going to be cutting promos back and forth. No, Sting doesn't say anything. You almost don't even know what he wants. JJ Dillon, I know it kind of became somewhat of a little bit of a running joke. It's like, who do you want? And he's like, I'll give you 6. And like JJ, come on, JJ, he wants Hogan. He goes, I'll give you Kurt Hennig. Like he keeps telling him kind of the wrong guy, and Sting is not interested, not interested. Basically, as you're leading up and doing these Monday Nitros, JJ Dillon's almost quote unquote getting it wrong with who Sting wants to fight. But I guess that's just drawing it out, right? You're just drawing it out more.
Right, right, right. And no one does it better than JJ. JJ is a master psychologist. Master psychologist. He just knows in his facial expressions. He get his hands up by his face and his body language be twisted. Now tell me who you want. What if I give you this? I mean, I look back at it and say, all the parts were there. It was cast like, the movie The Irishman. I mean, they had the best actors in the world playing in The Irishman, the same thing. And at this time for WCW, the greatest actors in the world, and a lot of smart guys. The Crow came from Scott Hall.
Yeah, it was his brainchild, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So with Sting, though, at this point, I mean, he's the most popular wrestler in the world. He's just, and it's so funny because, and he hasn't wrestled in a year. So that's one of those things. It's like, wow, the most popular wrestler hasn't wrestled in a year. It's just kind of funny how that works. And he's just becoming insanely popular. His pops are getting crazy loud whenever he makes an appearance and beats up the NWO, and just literally one man beating up the whole group after that whole group was so dominant for so long. What's kind of your thought process in booking it that way? Because the NWO literally killed everybody, and all of a sudden Sting comes and he's literally Batman. Nobody can kind of get to him. Nobody can really beat him up. He's really just this dominant force against 10 guys in the ring at once. He's dominant. What's the booking and thought process behind that?
It's that finally the chosen one has arrived, and he's going to bring us to victory. He was as dark as they were. If you go back, sometimes you make mistakes that are right or do things you don't even recall. But the thing that got the NWO over, if you go back, all the way back to the attack at Orlando, what did the NWO have?
The odds, the numbers.
The bats.
And oh, yes. Yep.
We didn't have guys that were doing, we had guys trying to do the right thing and play by the rules. We have now had a guy that had bleached blonde hair and a crew cut with a Michael Jackson blue jacket on with pellets with the gold hanging down. and a smile on his face, doing the woo, when you put and then do the Stinger splash. And now we have no longer do we have Dr. Jekyll, we have Mr. Hyde, and he has the bat, and he doesn't mind using it. So we now have a guy that we got a chance to to give these guys their comeuppance. And I mean, they all played it so well, and they all were so willing to do the right thing. There was never a question, why am I going to do this? They all were doing it for the betterment of the company.
With Sting today and over the last couple days, obviously Sting has resurfaced and he is now in AEW and is really the talk of the wrestling world. Very, I think very shocking. Some people were saying they were kind of foreshadowing it or leading up to it, or he was gone from WWE. WWE didn't resign him, so of course AEW is going to sign him. But I think great surprise. You don't really see that too much in wrestling anymore with great surprises. WWE was the master of the great surprise. What did you think about Sting? I mean, obviously he's 61 years old now, but he looks in great shape. I don't know how much he'll be wrestling, but he signed a full-time, multi-year deal with AEW.
Uh, Good for him. I think it'll help them immensely. They got one of the biggest recognized names in the wrestling business, and I'm sure he's going to help them tremendously.
Why do you think that he was a free agent? Because WWE, maybe had the chance, or I don't know. I mean, it could be a money issue, but why do you think that they would kind of let him go? Did they not think that he would go to AEW? Did they not think that he could draw anymore? Did they not think he could wrestle anymore? What's your kind of thought process on that?
My thought process on it is they didn't treat him the way Sting should have been treated when he came in. Didn't he lose every match he was ever involved in there?
The two big ones, yeah, lost to Triple H at WrestleMania, and then at a Clash of Champions. I think it might have been Night of the Champions at that point, but lost to Seth Rollins for the title. He won like two meaningless kind of other matches that kind of happened on Raw, and they were like kind of pointless. But yeah, the two big matches that he was involved in, he lost.
They may have seen, they thought they had seen that he is, for them anyway, they were thinking maybe his better days are behind him, where they don't understand that he's still over. And I'm not making judgments on anybody, but I'm saying if this was a reason to let him go, I think that would be the reason they got the most out of him they thought they were going to get. And they decided and the other thing is, maybe they didn't want him there because he might have taken some steam off some of the guys they're trying to push. And that is not bad business. Meaning, okay, I got a kid 31 and I got a guy 61. Well, I can have the kid wrestling another 10 years. How many more years can I have Sting really wrestling?
And the thing is with Sting too, it's he loses to Triple H at WrestleMania. It's definitely to basically say that WWF beat WCW in the war, and that's the way it's going down. Because Hogan was saying like, "Whoa, I can't believe Sting didn't win." Hall and Nash, who are buddies with Triple H, were saying, "I can't believe Sting didn't win." Sean Waldman said he couldn't believe Sting didn't win that match. All was set up for Sting to win and go over WrestleMania in this big moment, but Triple H wins. So it's like, wow, they really like are like obsessed with the fact that okay, WWF won the war of WCW. We can't let our Triple H, our Attitude Era guy, lose to Sting, right? I mean, that's kind of the crux of it.
Yeah, and sometimes I think the guys that you mentioned, Kevin Scott, Six, and Hogan, are just doing that as a line because they knew that there was no way Sting was going to beat Triple H.
It's kind of crazy looking back to very disappointing as just a big Sting fan, WWE fan, but it's just like, wow, Triple H beat Sting. Like something's not right about that. And if all those big legends and big names are even friends with Triple H are saying that, yeah, something's not right about it. But pretty cool to see. I don't know if you saw Sting make his debut. Pretty
Yeah,
surprising, but pretty cool. It still looks great.
yeah, he does. He looks very good.
Now,
You
do you
know,
think that he'll help turn the tide at all? I mean, they're winning, but they're only getting 800,000 viewers a week. Do you think that'll maybe help him get towards a million? Because he hasn't been on TNT in 20 years.
yeah, I know it's a different time. I know streaming is huge, but we're locked in basically, right? I mean, we just went back to phase one where you can't go to bars, you can't go to eat in the diners, restaurants at all. You can only get food to go. Um, the only gym on my end of the island's closed. They don't have the hairdressers and barbershops closed. Uh, they're doing very well, and seems to me they're kicking NXT's ass pretty good, but I would assume that Sting will bring them to the million mark because I think that this was a good bonus. But I think you and I have talked about this off camera. Do you think we've lost not just wrestling but sports in general have kind of fallen by the wayside because there's nobody in the stands? There's not that excitement. I mean, I'm a huge baseball fan, John. The only thing I watched was the last game of the World Series. I mean, because there was no interest there. It's like going to batting practice, and if you watch a football game and it's close and you're in like Green Bay's playing the Bears in Green Bay, the intensity from the people are coming across. Like here in Seattle, they got a thing called a 12 man. Are you aware of this?
Oh, yeah.
Where they raise a flag and it's a
Yep.
big deal. Everybody has the 12 man flags up and down the street I live on, but it doesn't seem, I don't hear it. There used to be, oh, Russell Wilson did wonderful last week. Oh, they're going to win the Super Bowl, blah, 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 every time I went to the store. I don't hear it like I used to. I think we're in a very strange time with this pandemic. And the longer it goes, it's going to, in my estimation, it's going to be a lot harder to get people back.
Absolutely. I agree. Now, going back to Starcade 97,
Can I
we
just
talked
add
about the.
one more thing, John? Can I say
Oh, yeah,
one
yeah,
more?
of course, of course.
Okay. Have you, I think all of us, not all of us, but most of us have a little bit of OCD. Okay. Have you ever been into like a series, we'll say The Office? I thought that was the funniest television program I've ever seen. Then all of a sudden, you stop watching it for a couple of weeks, And the next thing you know, you haven't watched it in 6 months. You just dropped it. I think that's what's happening to sports in general. I mean,
Yep.
what weren't the NBA ratings down the worst they've ever been?
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. The rating drop was I forget the number, but it was like astronomical. It was like 70% drop or something. It was huge.
And isn't it also uh, baseball was
Down big. Yep.
bad, and football right now is down huge across the board, huge. So I mean, I think we're heading into a new world, and the longer this continues, the more fans we're going to lose. And I think the people that run the companies who are very smart people, should get together with a plan to get the people back interested in the product. And if you know business, John, if your product isn't growing, there's no such thing as a product staying the same. It has to grow. It can't stay stagnant because it's much harder when it's a stagnant to bring it back up. And once it's stagnant, it will slide on you a lot quicker. So I think they need to go to what can we try, and maybe not shove it down their throats right at first, but let's come up with something out of the box and uh, and do it and give it a shot.
Yeah. Definitely. Hopefully Sting does that for AEW and helps them because he sure as hell was helping WCW as you kind of go through 1997. Now, building up, like we said, it's going to be a year build between Sting and Hogan. Probably the greatest build to me of all time, or one of the greatest builds of all time. I mean, this was just something the fans were dying for, clamoring for. Hogan is the biggest heel in wrestling. He's doing such a good job as Hollywood Hogan, the leader of the NWO. Sting is coming in through the rafters. Fans are popping huge for him. They want to see him. They love the Stinger. But also, you got Zabisco and Bischoff having their feud over WCW Monday Nitro. WCW NWO is on full blast. I mean, everything. You got DDP versus Kurt Hennig, Eddie Guerrero versus Dean Malenko. So on paper, this card it looks like it's going to be good. Obviously, it's going to be a big disappointment, really, because this is going to be the highest grossing pay-per-view in WCW history. Very, very successful, but it came off as partially a downfall, like a lot of people say of WCW, of what happens in the main event and how the rest of the card didn't really kind of live up to the hype. We'll get into that. First things first, Bret Hart, he falls in your lap. The Montreal Screwjob happens. What did you think about Bret and kind of last minute squeezing him in WCW when you had everything booked out? Like you said, you book it way ahead of time. So when you get Bret basically given to you weeks before this gigantic pay per view that was probably planned out well in advance, does that throw a monkey wrench into your plans?
Uh, no, with this one, with talent like Brett, what I saw, because I felt something. Okay, you can feel things in the air sometimes, and I felt, what if Brett came down when Hogan was ready to give up, and he slid in the ring and went over it and kicked Hogan's ass, and the referee disqualified Sting. And his interview was, "You weren't going to beat Hogan before I ever beat him, because I never got a chance to beat him." You know the whole backstory of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That that Brett, maybe that's what you thought you heard. You know the story I'm talking
Which one?
about Vince McMahon with Hogan's Brett approaching Hogan saying, "You're supposed to do a job for me," And he said, I'm not doing a job for you. Vince told me you agreed to it. And he said, well, let's go ask Vince. And when they walked in, he said, Vince, didn't you tell me that Hogan's going to do a job for me? And he said, Brett, that's what you thought you heard. With that on my mind, and that was a well known story at the time, I thought, because I just smelled something bad, I said, if they did that, you could come back in a three-way. You could now have Brett as an island upon himself. You could add something because it was just one of those things that there was something in the air that wasn't right. And I was looking for a way out. It's not the best, but it was better than what happened.
Yep. And Brett was one of the biggest stars in the business at this point because of the Montreal Screwjob.
Yeah,
Obviously, the other big star that came out of it wasn't Shawn Michaels. The other big star that came out of the Screwjob was Vince and that character and that Brett screwed Brett from. I mean, Vince became the big heel and the big character and the big star.
yeah, and he became the biggest heel in the business by far. I don't think that the Attitude Era could have started without Austin having Vince as the foil.
Yep, I agree. And it's funny because Brett is so hot at that point, but it's almost like, man, you have so many great stars in WCW and you had so much going on. It's almost like you putting the, what is it, the round peg in the square hole or however that's worded. It just was like he wasn't kind of fitting in because WCW and NWO, it was just going so well. You would think, oh, you throw another A plus play or another home run in there, it would help, but it almost hurts. It's like it's almost too much, right? Can you have too much star power?
Uh, in some respects you can, especially if they don't fit in. And that was like there was a thing I felt too that the people were saying, "Oh, he really got screwed." You know what I mean? And it was like almost a pity party from
Hmm.
the fans for him. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It wasn't like, oh, Brett uh, went out like $1 million when in the at the screw job. It was like, oh, it was such a downer for him.
Hmm.
He didn't come in on a really high note.
May have hurt his stock.
Right. Good idea.
So Hogan Sting obviously is the big match. I mean, that's the build. I mean, we're really kind of pumping this up for one of the first times ever in one of the nitros leading up to the event. Sting and the NW Sting actually gets beat up by the NWO. You know, the normal beatdown. Sting comes in, usually dominates and ways laced. He actually threw a little curveball in there, and Hogan got the one upper on Sting, and he actually beat up Sting for like the first time kind of ever. You really saw Sting get beat. Was that just to put a thought in people's heads that hey, yeah, maybe he doesn't have as good of a chance as we think.
No, it was to give more heat. I mean, uh, if we went the other way and Sting made the comeback, well, you've given the people what they want to see on the pay per view. You gotta keep the heat as far as you can on these guys before something at this magnitude happens.
So really, the match between Hogan and Sting was made official with a pre-taped live press conference at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. This aired on October 28th, 1997 on TNT programming during a commercial break for Hogan's new cable movie, Assault on Devil's Island. The promotion was a success. It drew a 4.2 cable rating, and it was just great. It was just co-promotion. They wanted to do some co-promotion, obviously, and promote whatever Hogan's got going on. At this point, Assault on Devil's Island.
That was in his contract.
Is that something that's to you a plus or maybe a minus a little bit that not the promotion. I mean, that's great and stuff, but like having to deal with maybe something that it's in Hogan's contract. You have to do something that Hogan wants. That be a problem for you a lot?
No, because that was the rule of the game. If you know what the rules are, I'd rather know what the rules are going in than, oh, by the way, this is what he's got. And because of him, a lot of people malign Hulk about this, but without him, we wouldn't have been where we were.
Very
And
true.
yeah,
Now, as far as the Giant and Kevin Nash, what was going on here? Because that's supposed to be a big match, and that's supposed to be a big thing that's going to happen, and obviously it doesn't. Is Nash really injured? Is there really something going on with Nash? What was the issue with Nash?
there was something going on with Kevin. I mean, Kevin had, you have to realize, Kevin had, how many surgeries did he have on his knees?
A lot.
Fifth.
Yep.
At this time, he was playing injured all the time. And at the time, I think he was really, really scared that he was going to be permanently injured. So I give Kevin the benefit of the doubt.
It's one of those things where that was definitely kind of another thing that would just we're talking about disappointment with the show was built up so big. It's gonna be an awesome show. That was definitely another disappointment because those two big behemoths, those two giants. Who's the one true giant? He's the he's gonna be the giant killer. He's the man, and then it's not gonna happen. So that definitely a big letdown for you, right?
Right, right. Anytime. I mean, anytime you have a match like that, substitutes are not up to par, too short, it was way too long. It doesn't help. That's for sure.
So the first match of the night, Eddie Guerrero defeats Dean Malenko. This was a match for the Cruiserweight Championship. This was a match. It goes about 15 minutes, but these are two of the best in the business. And this is kind of the best match of the show. I mean, maybe the only bright spot really on the show, which is crazy to say given how many great guys are on the card. But man, Malenko Guerrero to start it, you can't get better than that.
No, I always believed in starting the show with the best match I possibly could in the best technical match because it does say wrestling on the marquees still to this day, whether people want to believe it or not. And when you have guys at the caliber of Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko, you know they're going to get the show started the right way and continued the right way.
When you're putting the show together and you're booking the show, and like that's your first match in the card, that's going to be a good match. Ends up being a good match, of course. But are you thinking to yourself, okay, like in my head, like this is going to be a great show. It's going to have a great start. Are you supremely confident in kind of the way the show's going to go down?
Yeah, I'm confident that, this is the least going to get it off to the right start. And what I've often noticed is when a show starts off tremendous, it usually the guys don't want to go out and lollygag. Not that they do, but they want to perform to the level of the match prior to them.
So the second match of the evening is Scott Norton, Vincent, and the Macho Man Randy Savage replacing Conan, and they are going to defeat the Steiner brothers, Rick and Scott, and of course Ray Trailer, aka the Big Boss Man. Kind of crazy that almost Savage wasn't on one of the biggest shows of the year, and he's replacing Conan. But what was the thought process here, putting Macho in this random six man?
We needed star power, and Randy wasn't on it originally. So what we needed was somebody to fill in and put Randy on there. People felt they got something extra, that's for sure.
Third
And
match,
Randy was
Bill.
great.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, no, and Randy was a great performer.
So the third match, Bill Goldberg defeats Steve Mongo McMichael. Just to kind of, it's only about 6 minute match, kind of a little bit throwaway. This is real building up Goldberg, but still you're building him up here, and he beats Mongo. What do you think about putting these two together? Because both are going to be very green and very inexperienced.
Well, there was a history about the football,
Yep.
so I played off of that as well as I could. They had gone down to the school and practice. Uh, Again, these guys are getting paid money, and if you're leaving them off pay-per-views and they're getting a lot of money, people are going to call you in and ask you, why aren't they on these cards if we're paying them this much money and they're worth what you tell us they're worth?
Did you kind of think, though, as far as them both being green, did you kind of think going in like, okay, this is going to be a train wreck, or this is not going to be that great, or you think, okay, maybe these two behemoths are just going to, it's going to be just stiff as hell, and it's okay, they're green, but the crowd will be into it.
Yeah, I thought because it's stiff as hell that people get into it, and I think they did to a certain degree. And I think Bill started to get over to that degree where they're starting to get behind him. And a lot of it, wrestling is camouflage and good lighting, and we try to do our best on this.
The next match is Perry Saturn with Raven. It defeats Chris Benoit in a Ravens rules match. The thing here is, it's supposed to be Raven versus Benoit. Raven, when the storyline was basically saying, I don't want to compete, I don't want to do it, Saturn takes his place, and he ends up beating Benoit, who just ended a tremendous feud with you over the summer. We talked about that last week, and in one of the great feuds of all time, where you beat the living hell out of each other. But then he moves on to the Flock. He's feuding with the Flock. What was kind of thought process here? Was Raven really hurt, or was this just something to further the angle and keep it going?
I kind of gave Raven carte blanche to come up with what he wanted to do, and he usually came up with something very, very well. Uh, Very, very good, rather. He was Raven is a very smart guy, and he would be able to make a lot of great moves to keep an angle going. So I trusted him unqualified. I let him do what he would like to do.
And you think about the finish of this match. So Ravens rules. Raven DDTs Benoit. Benoit gets knocked out, put in the ring of Saturn, doesn't tap out. He just passes out. So it's really keeping him strong despite the loss. So, I mean, he does look good in a loss. Was that strong, purposeful of you to keep him strong in a loss?
Can't do any keep a guy any stronger that he doesn't tap out. He has the pain level not to tap out and pass out.
The next match, Buff Bagwell of the NWO defeats the Total Package Lex Luger. Obviously, Buff will cheat a bit. But what do you think about these two, Buff and Luger, who kind of always feuded and teamed, and they kind of had some pretty good chemistry? This is not a great match, but Buff gets the win. More of a storyline match, right?
More of a storyline match. And the other thing is, uh, they look so good. You know what I mean? We take into consideration that, oh, their work rate, oh, they don't know how to sell right. This is 1997. Most people don't even understand those terms. They know bad and they know good, but they don't understand. They rather see two guys that look like two athletes than two stickmen bouncing off the ropes. And Bagwell and Lex could give you more than a decent match. And they liked each other and they worked well with each other, which was a positive.
So then the next match up is Kurt Hennig of the NWO, who recently turned. and Diamond Dallas Page for the U.S. title. Diamond Dallas Page wins. He wins the U.S. Championship, but it was originally supposed to be Flair and Hennig. It was going to be a cage match culmination. Was Flair legit hurt at this point? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, remember? I think it wasn't his shoulder? I think it was his shoulder.
Oh, this might have been when he had shoulder surgery because
Yeah,
yeah, it was supposed to be the big culmination of the big cage match after what happened in Fall Brawl when Hennig put his head in the cage and just kicked his ass, and the NWO kind of did a great job defeating the Horseman that night in a controversial fashion. But DDP steps in, Diamond Cutter, he wins the match. But what did you think about kind of Flair being out and replacing him with DDP?
well, I think Dallas did a great job, and because he's a replacement, you can't. I don't think you should be the replacement if the people feel they're getting cheated. And I think Dallas just got Dallas off and running, working with Kurt Hennig, that's for sure, and beating Kurt.
Yes, no doubt about that. And as far as that match, I feel like it's funny because there was so much star power on Starcade. Savage almost didn't make it to the show. DDP almost didn't make it to the show. Maybe if Conan and Flair were around, maybe those two don't make it. I mean, that's crazy. That shows you how much star power was in WCW at that point.
Right, right, right.
The seventh match of the evening, Eric Bischoff, accompanied by Scott Hall, and of course wrestles Larry Zbyszko with Bret Hart as the referee. Larry Zbyszko defeats Bischoff and really, really saves WCW Monday Nitro, really saves quote unquote WCW at this point. What did you think about putting Bret in that situation and putting Bret as a referee for that match? Did you think that was not lame at all, but you think that comes up a little short as far as using Brett's star power, maybe not in a Bischoff versus a Bisco match? I know there was high stakes and it was an important match, but is that really necessary to put Brett in that match?
You have only so many pay-per-views you can use Brad on. He's on limited dates. I'd rather have done what I said earlier, but I wasn't going to get that done. I better use the guy, or they're going to say, you just paid this guy the most money anybody's ever gotten paid. You didn't have him on this pay per view. Explain yourself.
And he couldn't wrestle because of some, I guess, deal that he had with the WWF, and kind of, I guess, the way to get out of his contract. I think it was like some sort of 90-day clause or 60-day clause. No, I think it was 60 days because he
Yeah,
wrestled the next pay per view with Flair, kind of heals up, and he gets Flair at Sold Out. In a great match between Brett and Ric Flair, but I think it was a 60-day clause, something like that, where he technically wasn't allowed to wrestle. So I guess you had to use him in some capacity, though.
right, right, right. And that's the thing that people don't understand. If you're paying a guy the most amount of money ever to come over, and the first pay per view he's on, or could be on, and you don't have him anywhere on the card, why did you hire him then?
Right. Yep. And as far as kind of Brad, do you think that was beneath him at all, though, to be, a
Yeah,
referee? Or
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But at the time, it wasn't as bad as it sounds because it was to save the company.
right, high stakes for sure.
Yeah.
Now, the main event of the evening, of course, we've talked about it. It is Hulk Hogan, Hollywood Hogan, defending the title, the WCW, aka NWO, that it was spray painted, world title against Sting, aka the Stinger. And this is kind of where the controversy comes. So, Sting's out for a while, hasn't wrestled for a year. What did you think about how he came back? Because Shivani says in his famous line, "Look at the arms, there, Sting, looking great, there, Sting." Bischoff has said he was too pale. He looked something was off. His attitude, all these other kind of excuses and different things are popping up. What did you think about Sting and when he showed up to the pay per view that night?
Uh, I can't put my thoughts in somebody else's head. I don't know what they're going through, but you're off for a year, and you sold 750,000 buys. If you had to lay in the sun, you laid in the sun or whatever. But at this point, it almost didn't matter. It's like the Undertaker to me. If the Undertaker, it doesn't matter what the Undertaker looks like, he's still the Undertaker, and he draws money. We can start nitpicking the guy, but I don't know what's going on in his personal life. He might have been going through some really difficult periods, or I just know that when the bell rang, he gave it his all.
And the crowd was, I mean, they were definitely into it. And obviously, the match isn't what people expected. It wasn't that great a match. I think Hogan, maybe he gets too much offense. But the whole thing was that Bischoff was saying, oh, he wasn't tan enough. He wasn't tan. So he was out for a year, didn't wrestle for a year. He still looked big, though. I mean, his arms almost looked bigger, not bigger than ever, but I mean, they look pretty big and pretty substantial. He was in decent shape as far as look wise. And obviously, he had that big outfit on, the Sting, the new Crow Sting outfit. So you kind of couldn't tell if he was ripped, as far as his chest and stuff. But he still, to me, looked like he was in decent shape. He was maybe a little out of it because he had some at the time, and he admitted since a lot of drugs and alcohol problems. He just came back from elbow surgery, so he was coming back from an injury. So there was a lot of things going on. I think that people maybe didn't realize with the Stinger at that point. Did you think he was in good enough shape, though, as far as being the main event of the pay per view? I know you said it kind of doesn't matter. He's Sting. He's going to draw. But what did you think about how he looked, his shape? Was he in good enough shape and tan enough for your liking?
$750,000 buys. 750,000 buys. What kind of buys they doing now?
True. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's something you can always kind of hold, put his hat on, hold on to that huge draw. Now, as far as kind of what goes on in the match, so it's not a great match. I mean, Hogan at this era, sometimes I mean he was hit or miss. Sometimes he'll have a great match, and sometimes he won't. But do you kind of take that into consideration? It's like I don't know. Sometimes is Hogan not giving it his all? I mean, it seems like he definitely has to be, but is his character playing a role into it? I mean,
Oh,
sometimes his matches can be big misses.
this wasn't his. When a guy's out of the ring for a year, this thing was. That's a long time. That's a long time. And I mean, he didn't have. I don't think did he have any matches on TV at all prior to this.
No, he hadn't wrestled since '96. Yeah, no, it's been a year. Yeah, he hasn't wrestled in a long time.
That's where the and Hulk probably took more offense because Sting was probably tired, blown out. It's a whole different conditioning too. You can run 10 miles and not blow up. You get in the ring if you haven't been in a year, 2 minutes your tongue's hanging out. So I think Hogan, if it was took the offense, he needed this Sting to be able to breathe to make the comeback at the end.
Yeah, it's one of those things where he was definitely rusty as all hell. I mean, he hadn't wrestled in a year, but there was so much buildup and so much promise. I think to high expectations of everybody. I don't think it was going to reach that anyway. I mean, it doesn't even come close. I mean, it gets a bad rating from Meltzer. I mean, a lot of people didn't really like it. The crowd kind of was into it though and reacted accordingly to a lot of the stuff, but it just didn't kind of hit the mark. I felt though almost like it could have been a bit of a squash match. You ever think about that? Like he comes in and just obliterates Hogan and destroys him. I know it's this big main event, but I almost thought that the way it was built up, he almost should have just killed Hogan.
And it would have destroyed the head of the snake for the NWO. He To be a knight in shining armor, you got to kill a dragon. If you go and slaughter the dragon and cut off his head, he's not a dragon anymore. He's a salamander, and it hurts the rest of the guys all the way down. they're bowing to the king, and the king turns out to be a fool, it's not going to help anybody, babyface or heel.
So what about if, let's say, you have a bunch of NWO guys come down and they cheat, and you do it, not a schmoz, but you have all this outside interference and build up the match that way. If Sting can't really go, was that ever a thought process? Like, oh, we'll just have a lot of interference; it'll cover up for a lot of the rustiness of the Stinger at that point.
My belief is when you're gonna do what we thought we were gonna do, you do it as clean as you possibly can. And you don't want guys coming down and running down and they're saying, oh, it's the same old thing. When there's only two guys, the pop is that much bigger because your eyes aren't on 4 or 5 different people. If he wasn't in shape to do it, you know, there was nothing they could have done any differently. I mean, it was up to him, and Sting, being the gentleman that he is, was probably listening to Hogan, and maybe that was why he was overselling. I mean, there's so many variables that go into it that sometimes I listen to people tell me, well, this is what happened. You're not in the ring with the guy, so you don't know what happens. I mean, I could sometimes, after this length of been in wrestling, kind of surmise what happens, but that doesn't mean I know what's going in through a guy's head. Do you know what I mean? And I think
Yep.
Sting should have had a competitive wrestling match, and I wanted to make the world championship mean something. I paid for the Roy Jones, Mike Tyson. I didn't see George Foreman appear and knock out Mike in the corner. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It wasn't the greatest fight of all times, right? But it was entertaining, and I knew what I was getting. Now, could I have enjoyed it more if Mike really teed off on Roy? Yeah, but I was happy with it, and it was a good enough pay-per-view with Mike and Roy that I'll buy it again.
But you couldn't have been happy with the way Hogan and Sting went down, because
No,
obviously there's going to be, this is one of the most controversial moments, one of the most controversial, pay-per-views of all time. It's funny, the Montreal Screwjob happens and then this happens. It's like, whoa,
right,
what the hell's going on in the wrestling business? So much controversy kind of going on, and real controversy. So something happens with Hogan. Hogan must get to Nick Patrick. What do you know about it? Because obviously you're saying that's the way it was supposed to go down, which means that it didn't go down the way you thought it was going to go down. So Nick Patrick, Hogan hits a leg drop. Nick Patrick's supposed to do the fast count 1, 2, 3, and he just does a normal cadence of 1, 2, 3, which makes Sting look bad. And then Bret Hart comes down and says, "Oh, it was a fast count." Blah blah. What they should have done, and I've rewatched the tape a million times. Even did it that night like 3 or 4 times. What he should have done, he should have said Sting had a shoulder up, because if you actually watch the the thing, you can make the think Sting obviously thinks it's going to be a quick count, but he kind of has his shoulder up a little bit. So he should have said not a quick count. Should have said the shoulder was up, and it kind of would have made up for a little tiny bit of the huge mistake by Nick Patrick, but not really. But I think that would have helped, because obviously he didn't do the quick count. So what happened? I mean, was there supposed to be the quick count and he just messed up? Was supposed to be the quick count and his normal cadence is so slow he thought that was fast? I mean, what the hell happened?
it was. I mean, when you work with a referee, you know his cadences. Uh, the only people that know what happened are Hogan and Nick.
So what was supposed to happen?
Exactly what you said. It was a quick count. They were supposed to get into a big deal with the three of them into a fight. Things spilling it into the floor. The NWO come down. WCW we go off the air in a big crazy thing. Now,
So obviously was Bret Hart always? I mean, Bret comes down and Bret says, no. He doesn't let them ring the bell. He's technically an official from the last match because of the Zbyszko Bischoff match. He's technically still a ref, so he was always supposed to come down there, do that. Sting puts him in the Scorpion Deathlock, and then Bret says, Hogan tapped out. That was always going to be the game plan as long as Nick Patrick did what he was supposed to do.
right. Right.
Did you ever ask Nick Patrick, like, what the hell happened out there?
Of course, I asked him, but I knew, he said he didn't kick out.
But how come he didn't do the fast count, or he thought that was a fast count?
I could explain it that 12 different ways. On his version, he counted fast. We've been talking about this since '97. You and I don't think he counted fast. So I have to think Nick must have had a good year at the end of the year. Something definitely went haywire.
Now I think in an interview, I don't remember where I saw it or read it, but he was saying that, I guess, miscommunication as well. How could it be miscommunication though? You're the booker. You're kind of, you're laying it out. You know what it is, unless he's talking about Hogan told him something different than you told him.
Right? Could be.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, he knew what the finish was, yet there was miscommunication. If I wasn't sure of a finish on a title match in front of the biggest show we've ever had, I said, could you explain that to me again? You know? And miscommunication, like you just said, miscommunication with who?
Right.
That's the fact.
One of those things is always kind of, and a lot of people say kind of that was the start of the leading of the downfall of WWE. Obviously, they still have a red hot year. They're still kicking ass for a few months in '98 until Tyson and Austin have their confrontation, and then McMahon on I think it's April 13th, episode 1998 of Raw, he wrestles Austin, or you think he's going to wrestle Austin in Philadelphia. That pops this huge ratings the first time in basically 83 weeks. This would be the 84th that they actually won the night that Raw would win. So it was still hot for a few months, and obviously going into the summer, WWE would still win. They would kind of trade a lot of victories off, and Goldberg was hot as hell, and Warrior came in and popped the rating for a few weeks. I mean, so they were still good, but a lot of people say that this kind of led to the demise and downfall of WCW because of this horrible finish. Obviously, the title gets held up, so Sting wins. That has this huge moment. The whole WCW contingent comes out. Everyone's going crazy. They're putting him on his shoulders. He's happy as hell. I mean, it's if you look at it aesthetically, it's just an awesome moment, and it just looks cool as hell. But there's this general feeling from me, and I think a lot of the other fans was like, man, Sting won, but he didn't look that strong winning. He kind of didn't kick out of the Hogan leg drop. And like, was that supposed to be a fast count? And was Bret in the right or was Bret in the wrong? Like, it was weird. It almost seemed like too controversial to get so excited about if you're a WCW fan.
Right, right. And I think it sums up when he said this miscommunication. Obviously, there was, and that sums it up. There was miscommunication somewhere.
And Bischoff says that him and Hogan like looked at each other and they looked at Sting. They're like, "Man, you don't look like you're ready for the main event here." Like they were almost trying to me, make maybe an excuse of why Hogan should keep the title when everything was leaning and pushing and everything was leaning towards Sting winning the title and the NWO finally losing. So I don't know. It's almost seemed, and you could tell me if I'm right or wrong. Almost seemed maybe Hogan didn't want to give up the belt yet.
That could have been it too. That could have been it too. I mean, again, I'm not trying to put their thoughts in my head and vice versa, but if they're saying the guy wasn't tanned, he wasn't in shape, he had a year off, maybe they're expecting something else. The guy pull a piss and vinegar coming in. you said, and I didn't even realize that he had problems with drugs and alcohol. So there must have been something going on there too.
And with Thunder coming, so they have the big thing on Thunder with JJ Dillon saying, you're not the champion anymore. The belt is held up, and now basically kind of waste a month, not waste, but you're building up for a month, and then February is going to be Super Brawl, which is going to be Sting and Hogan again, and Sting is going to win the title. Another kind of little bit of a schmoz finish there with the Savage getting involved, but Sting wins finally and gets the title back, and he really doesn't have that long of a reign with it, but you get into that another time. It's just really focused on Starrcade here. I just want to kind of put a period at the end of that sentence. Sting does eventually beat Hogan for the title, but it takes a few months, and you're kind of dragging it out a bit. But that night, how like pissed are you, or are you just like saying, man, like that didn't go down the way I wanted to go down? This, how are we going to make up for this? Like, what's your thought after that goes down?
Of course you're pissed, but the sun's going to rise tomorrow morning and you got to get back to work. So you better start trying to figure out how to fill in that hole and buff it and make it as good as you can because, it's not make itself better.
Overall, Starrcade 97, especially going into it, such high expectations, high hopes. It was one of the best built pay-per-views of all time. It was just one of those things where like, wow, this is going to be awesome. And then very disappointing. I mean, it was one of those shows that wasn't as good as you thought it would be on paper. It looks like it's going to be great. You kind of have the same feeling, bit of a disappointment overall in that show.
Yes, yes. I was very disappointed in the outcome. The by far the best match on the show was still pre-match. If the last match didn't any near like the first match, we would have had a tremendous show, but it wasn't.
And I think that is a great stopping point here. And I just want to mention the plugs real quick. You could follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Two Man Power Trip. The website is tmptempire.com. You could follow Kevin on Instagram at Taskmaster Talks. You go to prowrestlingtees.com and type in Kevin Sullivan and check out Kevin Sullivan's Pro Wrestling Tees store. That is prowrestlingtees.com. Also, go to Double Hell Wrestling, Double Hell T-shirt store. It's just unbelievable array of shirts for Kevin Sullivan there. Check out some Devil shirts, some Taskmaster shirts, really cool stuff, and that is Double Hell T-shirts. Kevin, what else you got going on?
I'll be in Dallas next Saturday for SW Fury. Mark Henry's there, Teddy Long's there, I'm there, Andrew Anderson's there, Tim Storm, a host of others. So come around and see me.
And don't forget about the NAWA December 19th down in Daytona Beach, Florida. You can go to the Ocean Center box office for tickets or just go to Ticketmaster and type in the Ocean Center in Daytona Beach, Florida for more information. The Blood Hunter will be there with Kevin Sullivan as well, along with Davey Boy Smith, Alpha Jr., and a whole host of others, Chase Stevens as well. So you got a lot of great guys on that card. That is NAWA. Check out Ticketmaster for more. And that is obviously one of Kevin's favorite venues down in Daytona Beach. You and the Blood Hunter going to be dominating.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it as always. And of course, thank you to all the fans out there listening and enjoying the show. We will see you right back here next week on Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. See you next week, folks.